What is up, friends and listeners? Today's episode is with one of the smartest people I have ever gotten a chance to chat with, and I do not mean that hyperbolically. Max Roser is a director of research at the University of Oxford, and he is also a founder of a little website called ourworldindata.org. When I first came across Our World in Data, it quickly became one of my favorite websites out there, if not my favorite. It is a resource that distills and crunches all of the best data and research out there and puts it in a really accessible way for you and I to be able to see what's going on in the world around us. And it is a nice antidote to the mass media's portrayal of what they want you to feel like is happening around us. And instead of the world feeling like it's falling apart, they look at a lot of the best research and data out there and highlight some pretty amazing positive trends that have been happening over the last few decades to counterbalance that. Max is, he's also just such a unique person to chat with because he ties in all kinds of different disciplines in addition to economics and data visualization into how he thinks about his work, his own career path, and it's just a great episode. We talk about everything from his own story, Our World in Data, Y Combinator, that he literally just finished about 2 days ago, and it's an episode that I'm really excited to share with you all. So without further ado, here is Max Roser. This is Below the Line. All right, Max. Cheers.
Cheers, James.
Cheers. I'm drinking one of my favorite morning drinks, matcha bar, that I told you about a few minutes ago. And then you had one. How did it taste?
I loved it.
It is
I had matcha tea in the past, but to have the matcha without the work,
right? Yeah,
sounds like a good way forward.
It is matcha bar cans. This Hustle is what it's called, and it's matcha tea in a carbonated can. You can find it. I think it's Whole Foods, but that's neither here nor there because I'm really pumped to have you on the podcast. We've known each other for years, and for listeners that don't know, my background's in development economics originally, and Max is one of the best known development economists in the world now because of the work that you've been doing out of Oxford in Our World in Data. You can go find ourworldindata.com.
.org.
What's that?
.org.
.org. Sorry. .org.
Well, the .com redirects to the .org, obviously.
There we go. So you can go either way. If you're a for-profit person or a non-profit person, they'll hook you up. Well, we were actually just talking before we started about research around the web and what was the organization you're talking about that you're meeting with later today? If you're comfortable saying.
Sure. Like they're called Fermat's Library. Fermat was this mathematician, and their work is focusing on maths, but isn't restricted to maths. And what they want to do is to...
And for Americans, that's math. Maths, yeah.
True. Well, like the way that research is mostly published is in academic journals, and those academic journals simply produce PDFs that they put online. And then every researcher, everyone who's interested in it, reads these PDFs by themselves. And one big step forward is to do that at the university, where people have reading groups and get together after everyone read the paper, and then you can discuss it with your colleagues. But they're basically taking the next step, where it's not just your group of researchers in that closed circle of university, but it's public for everyone. And they build this tool where the PDF can be annotated by everyone who's reading it and is bringing their own thoughts to the research. And that's the product that they're building. And it's an open access, free product. And it's very close to our mission. So I'm going to have lunch with those guys.
Yeah, it's such a obvious problem when you hear about it, but it's something that you don't, that's, I've never really thought about. I've just, like in the medical field, PubMed has, I've heard it's about 100,000 articles published a month, or research studies published a month. So it's way more than anyone could ever. You can't even consume, maybe, because they're so dense, and it's very hard to extract. Okay, what are the learnings? What are the insights for a layman? It's you could get through maybe 10 a month, but 100,000. And these just get published. Like, what happens today in our world and data, and we'll get into that in a sec. There can be this amazing team of researchers that do this work for 5 years, bringing these insights to light. And then how does that research make its way into either policy or into dialogue today? How does that happen?
Yeah, like all of these projects are very, very closely connected, and I think there's a big scope for innovation in making research available, in making reading research more useful for the reader. Like, I was just meeting with Andy Matuszak and Michael Nielsen, who are working on this project, where the frustration that they're coming from is that everyone spends so much time reading, and then a year later, few people actually remember the key insights from what they've read, right? Like, that's such a frustrating...
Happens to me with every book I read, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And the way to make reading more, or learning, like the way to make learning more useful is to space out repetition over the coming weeks and months. So they produce this reading experience where you go through the material once, but then you get notifications 3 days later, a week later, 10 days later, a month later, and maybe a year later. So with increasing time distance from your original reading, where you are asked about some of the to get back to some of the questions that you learned about.
Right.
And it's such a straightforward thing to do. It wasn't possible really to do this for centuries. Now it should be possible with the web, with reminders in social media, with your phone, with emails.
Right.
And it should be really straightforward, and we can build these tools to make the research production and consumption much more engaging and useful for everyone. Yeah,
the consumption side it feels like such a discussed side of the equation, because and I imagine, like most things, it's just a relic from the past.
Yes.
50 years ago, it was just trying to get published was so hard. And what's sad now is you have these brilliant minds still thinking, and kind of encouraged to think about the publishing and rightfully thinking about the data and the methods of acquiring the data, but not thinking about the consumption or the uptake. And then you have all of these clowns on YouTube just thinking about uptake and consumption of whatever they're peddling, and their influencer channel, that are brilliant on that side of things, that are thinking about, all right, I need to open with this intro of a mystery that I solve at the end of this 5-minute video on whatever, I don't know, unboxing of an iPhone that will get 10 million views. And then you have these brilliant, whether it's economists or psychologists or doctors, spending years of their lives after spending, 15 years gaining the accreditation to be able to do it, spending years coming up with research, study, and then publishing it, and no one is thinking about that.
Yeah, it's an absurd situation. Like you put it really nicely there. Like on the product side, if you want to think about it in these terms, we didn't really innovate that much, not just in the last 50 years, but in the last 500 years. Like the big one was the printing press.
Right.
But then, like, the PDFs that researchers produce, they're essentially like they're sheets of paper with some text on it and some drawings on them, and like every once in a while a photo on them. But it's basically what was possible for like researchers 500 years ago. They could have produced a very similar looking product in a way. And then sure, like the way to distribute it over the web, that changed, but it's still sheets of paper with black and white.
It's so fascinating. And it's I imagine there's like all of us were so influenced by just the people around us that you think, okay, I'm going to publish this, and so and so, so and so, and so and so are going to read it. I can't wait for their opinion, and I'm going to blow them away with this study, and that's kind of the audience maybe you have in your mind, especially if you're in graduate school. You're just thinking about, the professors or your radius of influence around you, and making sure that everything's there to impress them, but forgetting that it's there's just so much content coming out from every direction in the world we live in that I imagine there's amazing research right now that's just sitting in piles unread. And you told me a stat a few minutes ago from the World Bank.
Yeah.
What was that stat?
Well, yeah, the World Bank has a research paper series that they publish, and very admirably, they looked into the uptake of that research, and they found that 32% of their papers that they publish get not downloaded once.
They're not downloaded once.
Like, how frustrating is that? Like, it's.
And what do you think the average year span or the time span that people spent on those papers that don't even get downloaded once?
Like, if I remember correctly, they looked into the 2 years after publication, and for the same study, they also looked at citations, where it was 89%, if I remember the number correctly, that never get cited once.
But how long do the researchers spend on that study that they publish in October 2017 that doesn't get downloaded once?
Like, it's a really hard and long process. I think that's one of the really challenging things in research, that from the moment where you get interested in a particular research idea until you actually can start working on it, until you have the data, it might be a year if you're fast, but if you have to actually collect the data yourself, it might be 2 years to actually launch a survey, launch a study somewhere. God. And then it's several years to actually run the study and collect the data. Then you analyze the data. It could be
my God. And then boom, no one downloads it.
Yeah.
And it's featured by the World Bank.
Yes.
That is
it's very frustrating.
So sad, yeah.
Yes.
And I imagine, those really smart researchers, they're like, okay, we're not doing that again. Or I might get one more of these studies out, but that was so painful for such a little payoff that
it's very, very hard psychologically to keep up the motivation, right? If you know that this is the world that you live in and that you publish in. You must be very, very convinced about the value of your work and very much self-motivated to actually keep up the energy for so many years to actually get through that.
Well, that is so fascinating.
And if you compare that with a YouTube video, you get up with the idea in the morning, and in the afternoon you have the video out, and if you're great at that, like, you have 2 million views the next morning or something, right? Like, it's absurd.
I feel like it almost, and the reason that those folks are able to creatively, obsessively think about just consumption is they're able to iterate so quickly, put so much stuff out there that I think a non-obvious but seemingly important part of why there isn't consumption is probably because it takes so long just to get the product, the finished product, the research paper, that you're just thinking about that, and you don't have this iteration of, I've done this 12 times, I made these mistakes in the first 8 that never got read, I'm going to make sure I fix that, rather than from age 33 to 39, you're just doing the study, your first one, no one reads it at 39, and you're like, well, fuck that, I'm not going to spend 6 years doing another one and iterating, whereas that YouTube star has done 1,000 and has tried so many different things, and that rate of iteration, I imagine, is in testing on that other side, that consumption side.
And I think the way forward there is not to switch research to the YouTube.
Right. Yeah.
model,
right? Just as an example.
The way forward is somewhere in the middle, where the YouTubers, some of them, I guess, need to spend more time on getting it right.
Right.
And
the
researchers need to spend some more time in actually understanding where the readers are coming from, what the questions are that they have, how to present the research in a way that makes it understandable for the audience that they care about, and actually be much more in contact with the audience that they're doing this work for.
Yeah. Yeah. This is like overly simplistic, but almost something to where it's like, hey, can you build a following and engagement around bite-sized versions of what you're doing just for your own sake? Show that you kind of have a finger on the pulse of an audience, the language that they can consume this information in. And then, once you do that, that's part of the criteria because no one wins in that scenario if you fund that research project for $50,000 or $150,000 or $500,000.
Much more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like these research projects are really expensive.
And then no one reads it. No one wins in that scenario.
Right.
But also to your point into what you were just talking about, that FAMAS library,
FAMA, yeah.
FAMA library, it's just better tools for the consumption.
Yes.
That's interesting. Okay, so zooming out and just kind of covering on a little bit about you as a founder of Our World in Data, and we're also going to touch on going through Y Combinator. You literally just finished it 2 days ago.
Yeah, 2 days ago.
So we're going to talk about that as well as talk about just the whole concept of this podcast of observing what's really going on. Our World in Data. You guys are the OGs of fake news. Way before that was even a term. Years ago, you're publishing data that said, okay, here's a headline, but here's what the data of the last 50 years is actually saying. It's just such a it was such a fascinating contrast when I first came across you all years ago, and you built a brand now that has inspired multiple best-selling books, is read by 1 million people a month, and you started out of a small office in Oxford years ago, and now it's this thing that I think is. I actually said it on a previous podcast with Mike Maples that I think it's the most important website on the internet, in my view, and I really do believe that. And if you go check it out and you follow Max on Twitter, you'll see what I mean. But in this world where the YouTube versus research is such a good kind of parallel, because in this world where our content is kind of dominated by people that haven't really studied or thought deeply about what they're putting out there, and they're just putting it out there because it might be fun, or it's just your friends' photos of their new baby. That's important stuff in its own right. But you guys are on the opposite end of the spectrum of the content that you're putting out is not only super consumable, really easy to read and fascinating, but it's just hours and hours and hours of aggregation of thousands and thousands and more hours of people putting these studies together, and you guys reading through them, finding trends. It's so fascinating. But walk me through where the idea came from for Our World in Data, and what were you doing before? Right.
Well, the idea came. I had the idea when I was still a student. That's really when it sparked my interest, and I guess it was really the frustration that I went through years of schooling. I'm from Germany. Germans go to school for a really long time. Then university, and then at some point I saw some of these charts that actually mapped out how global health, global prosperity changed over the last decades.
And what were you studying at the time?
In my undergrad, I studied philosophy and geoscience. So I did two bachelor degrees.
Too slow. What is it to know what geoscience is? What is
geoscience? Was this mix of you study climate, you study geology, you study geography, and some economics. So it's really a mix of different subjects. So it was a great field of studies. I thought it was too much of a mix of everything, and then I focused much more in my studies later. But as an undergrad degree, I loved it. We were out on the glaciers, and we were traveling quite a bit. It was in the Alps, so it was a great field of study. But
what were some big takeaways from that in that lens of maybe Our World in Data? That data says one thing that surprises the layman's view.
Actually, I think the revelation there was really this, how living conditions globally have changed. That's something that I was just not aware of, and by that moment, I was going through years of studies, going through years of school, trying to follow the news. And I was just shocked that I wasn't aware of some of these really fundamental changes that happened during my lifetime.
Like what?
For example, this morning we were looking at child deaths in the last generation since 1990. The number of child deaths in the world has halved.
Since 1990?
Since 1990, yeah.
Since we were kids?
Exactly, since we were kids. And I think that's one of the most important achievements that humanity has ever achieved.
Wow.
Yeah. At a time when the number of births in the world is now not increasing fast, but it increased slightly. So if you look at it as a rate of deaths, it's even a stronger decline. But just the absolute number of deaths more than halved, from more than 12 million to a bit more than 5 million. And that's children under the age of 5. And at one way of looking at it is, it's just the biggest achievement ever, because we lived in this really tragic reality for centuries, for millennia really, where 1 in 3 children died before the age of 5. If you imagine what it means that for a young family to lose a child, it's just the worst tragedy that you can possibly come up with. And that happened on this really large scale, basically to every father, every mother, with a fertility rate of 5, 6, 7 children per mom. It happened on average close to 2 times that a mom would lose children.
That is, yeah. And I remember in the book Sapiens, talks about, to put that in perspective with a real story, they talked about King Edward. I believe it was King Edward about 1,000 years ago, just the most prosperous version of a family 1,000 years ago. So this was happening to everybody, but just that specific example where they have the records of deaths, 16 children. And I think it was, I want to say 13 deaths,
right?
16 children. That is unimaginable. And you said the average mother would go through how many? 2 deaths?
Well, if you no matter where in the world you were born in the past, the child mortality rate was at least a third.
Wow.
And then fertility rates varied a little bit 200 years ago, but they were around 6 children per woman.
Wow.
So for the average mother, it meant 2 child deaths of children younger than 5.
Yeah.
On average in the world.
And for the listeners, this is the type of stuff that is so fascinating about our world and data. And you said you were looking at that as a team this morning? Yeah,
I was just looking at it this morning because I was looking at this decline now over the last generation. I actually pulled up the numbers just now. Mm-hmm. So in 1990, 12.6 million children younger than 5 years died. And in the last data for 2017, it's down to 5.4 million. And it shows you both, right? It shows you that it's really possible to change the world. Mm-hmm. Like people who have this idea that it's stagnating and this cynic idea that everything that we ever try to solve, we're just failing and we're just creating new problems. That's just wrong. Like it's actually possible to change the world, and in many ways we did it. But then it also shows how terrible the world is still. Like 5.5 million children dying every year. That's 15,000 children a day. And many of them die from diseases and causes that are preventable. And it shows you how much further we can still go if we set our mind to it. And then I guess the problem, to connect this with what we discussed before, the problem that we are trying to solve is that this knowledge is all there. Like we know what is happening around the world. We know why these children are dying. We know what is possible, what makes a difference in reducing child deaths.
We have it's like we have the knowledge in one area of where it's happening. We have the knowledge of what stops it in another area.
Right.
And the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
And it needs to be known to the public. It needs to be known by policymakers that it's possible to put this knowledge into concrete ideas and actually reduce these tragic deaths further. That's the idea of our world in data.
And so take me from undergrad, when you started just learning about this kind of the beginnings of these types of trends in living conditions. So then from undergrad, where'd you go?
Right. Well, then I guess a big change was I was reading Amartya Sen. He's an economist, like you of course know him.
Well, and for leaders, he's a Nobel Prize winning development economist
and
South America.
And his work really influenced me at the time and made me change to study economics then for a graduate degree.
Same here. That's
really?
what when I was in high school. Yeah, that's what made me. Talk about someone that can compile the data and present such a compelling case.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Like for anyone listening, Development as Freedom is a great book, a great introduction into development economics. I guess it's a bit outdated on the data, but then you have our world in data to update your data on that, and the philosophy and the economics in the book is really strong and really great to read. And I guess that changed me to study economics, and then I focused mostly on inequality as a research topic. But it always frustrated me that we have this knowledge, we have this research, but it's actually not known to a large public. And well, my first idea was to do what everyone tries to do, to write a book. And I was gathering the data for that book, and that got out of hand quickly. Like, it's just so much data that we have and so much knowledge that we have on how the world is changing and why it is changing, that eventually... Then I was at Oxford at the time, and I was working with Tony Atkinson, one of the like people call him the godfather of inequality research. Like he spent the last 5 decades really researching poverty and inequality, and he then had the idea that we should just publish this online, just publish it on the web. Like, the data itself is useful for people to know, and he actually, it's funny, like, it also connects back to this question of the medium and innovating on how we produce research. Because at the time he just had finished a book on earnings inequality in OECD countries, and he was so like unfortunately he died 2 years ago, and he was such a perfectionist, and there was one table on page 68 where one number was wrong, and it was like the first digit after the comma that was wrong, and like it wouldn't have made such a big difference. But he was really frustrated, and he was like, the way that we should publish that is on the web. Like, if I had made a mistake on a web publication, I could just go and fix that number here. And he was 70 at the time, and he got it right. He saw that the web was the way forward.
And that ties to my views on podcasting, is that I don't think we really, I mentioned this previous episode, but we don't really know what this is yet. Like, we call it podcasting. Like, we have a quote unquote name for it. People know what they are, but I don't think we really know what is going on, what this is, when it allows for an unfiltered conversation that someone can listen to in a deep form, long form way around topics that, like everything from how you can consume it to listening to it while you're working out, to the fact that you and I can sit here for an hour. If this was like a newspaper article, I'd get 7 lines from you, add in my own kind of filter or angle to it, print it out, and then it'd be statically right there, and it's my version of the things that you're saying, for someone to essentially get a glimpse into a 5-minute exposure to someone like you, versus a podcast where you can talk for an hour and actually ask the questions back and forth that are going through, hopefully going through listeners' minds when they're right in real time as they're happening. To me, the media totally changes. The medium totally changes the message, and it's phenomenal. I think that's such a small, like it's a subtle but really powerful insight that he had of like, oh my God, I could change that online. And then that one decimal change turned into our world. So did it turn into that insight of like, we should publish online?
Yeah.
Did that turn into world in data?
Exactly. That turned into Our World in Data. And like at the time, I wasn't in the right position to actually pull this off. I spent a lot of time programming as a kid, as a teenager. But then during my studies, I didn't continue that. And so I didn't have much knowledge of how to pull it off, and didn't have much knowledge on HTML, JavaScript, the languages. I had to actually learn over the following months, and it took me quite some time to come up with a site and a structure that I would be comfortable with. So, but that was the initial idea. Yeah, that got me on the track. Can
we nerd out on those first few months as a founder that was embarking on something you obviously knew was worth doing because you were doing it, but I imagine was this the first type of initiative like this you were starting?
Yeah, I hadn't done something like that before, so I spent many nights, and at the same at the time I had a day job, right? Like I was a researcher at Oxford. I was paid to do research on inequality. That was where my focus was on. So it was much more a project that I spent the evenings and weekends on. So it took some time to get it off. But I think that it also got easier in the meantime. So at the time, I was using WordPress as most people at the time, I guess, or maybe still today. And for the visualizations, that was more of a pain. Like I wanted to actually not just produce a static visualization where it would be me who chooses the particular country or world region to focus on, but I wanted to implement that vision that we have all of the data on all of those countries. We understand what's happening in all different world regions with all different causes of deaths. And I wanted to build a visualization tool where the reader can access that data that is available. So to build these interactive visualizations, that took me some time. And like that changed around that time. Like Flash was definitely dead, and D3, the JavaScript library, was taking off. So I was trying to learn D3 and JavaScript to pull this off. And
walk me through why the visualization was so important.
Yeah, like I think that is really another of these slight tweaks, but that actually made a big difference. Lots of the data is there, but then it's often in an appendix of a research paper, or it's in a table at the website of the United Nations or so. And just to take that table and take the data and actually present it in a visual format is so much more helpful for people to actually make sense of what's happening.
Kind of like a picture's worth 1,000 words type of. And then walk me through why it was also so important to be able to rearrange the visualization or use a kind of a dynamic visualization.
I think it's the way that you would do it in a PDF, where you can just do one visualization, is to make a point about what happens to, let's say, cancer, and you have the data for 5 countries in the world, and that's the data that you would put up on this chart. It's just really hard to visualize what happens in 200 countries at the same time. And you have this one little image that gives you a snapshot of what happens to some countries. If you are a good researcher, then you pick those countries that are somehow representative for what's happening in the world at large. But for the reader, it's always frustrating. Like, you are from the US, but I didn't pick the US as an example country, and you want to understand what's happening here,
right,
and make it relevant for your own thoughts about the health system in your own country. And that data is just lost in the process between me pulling in the data from maybe the IHME, a data source for what's happening to cancer, and then producing the chart. So the way forward should really be take the data on all the causes of deaths for all the countries that is there and put that into a tool that makes it easy for people to pull out the data that is relevant for them and for the questions that they have. So I think the interactivity is definitely a key there.
Yeah, it's as an American, we usually get included in data sets, but when I lived in South Africa, I was always most of the time it was left out. There's a hilarious Reddit subreddit community of like world without NZ, and it's just like world maps. People finding world maps that just don't include New Zealand. That conveniently just like don't think it's important, and there's a whole just subreddit of just photos of professional maps that just don't include New Zealand, and but yeah, if you're from Costa Rica and you want to know where you are in this trend, it's especially if it's just in a newspaper article that the New York Times publishes, it's very easy to feel like, okay, well, we're left out.
Yeah.
So you start working on it, and tell me kind of like what was the did you have a vision for what it could become? Was it just like, or was it just, hey, let's just build this out because Tony thinks it should be online and it'll be this 5% of my time? Or did you think, whoa, this could be really, really different, very unique?
I think it's one of those things where, like, if I'm honest, I thought it should be big and it should be relevant. Like, I mean, it's like you're a founder. Like, you don't found something if you don't have at least some idea that it could be really relevant. And I was thinking it's just mad, the world that we live in, where we focus so much on what happened in the last 24 hours, what happened in the last hour, but no one has an idea of the big, really transformative changes that are happening in the world. Like, I thought it can't be the case that that this stays the status quo for the coming decades. We need to understand the really transformative changes that are happening.
Yeah, the phrase of a little information is a dangerous thing, that like sums up the state of our news. It's these fearful moments of what could happen, and it's just giving you these bite-sized, 24 hours at a time pieces of information. Whereas if you had complete information or you zoomed out, you'd realize, oh, that's actually not the trend. And I'm getting manipulated to think that the trend line is. Yeah,
maybe it's the manipulation, but often it's actually that you ask very different questions, right? Like like Tony actually once put it like that. Like, he said there was never the day in which the newspapers in the UK announced the Industrial Revolution is happening, right? Like that isn't. It's just not. It's an event in world history, but it's not an event that happens on any particular day. And the people that lived through it, like, missed much of it.
Yeah, it's only, and not just an event. It's like a chapter in a 7-chapter book of Industrial Revolution, and yet it's every single day the talking points. You talk about the eventual like footnotes or things that are left out of the history books completely because they're not important. Right. That's what we talk about, or you gossip about, or you are fearful of. But you zoom out, and wow, that's a good way of articulating. You can miss entire chapters, meaningful, significant.
Actually, I was impressed now being here for the last 10 weeks in Silicon Valley. People here, I think, often quite get it because it's really relevant for understanding market opportunities, right? Like when people have actually money invested somewhere, they really want to get it right. Like, what is happening really to the prosperity in Africa? Are we seeing growth? Are we not seeing growth? You want to be right about these things if you actually invest in it. Is it really a change that we are seeing in preventing cancers? And do I understand the market here correctly or not? Like, these big trends are really relevant for people who are investing into what the world will look like in 10, 20 years from now.
Right. The incentive structure here is very unique in that it's like, okay, how can we capitalize on a 10-year trend?
Yes.
Versus...
You want to get it right.
Right.
The incentive is to get it right, while the incentive in the news is not necessarily to get it right.
Right.
The incentive is to say something provoking or like fun or
get people talking today, or clicking today.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the incentive is not for being accurate.
Right. It's we could talk about that for hours. And I want to get to the 10 weeks that you've just spent here in Silicon Valley and Y Combinator. And for those that don't know, Y Combinator's, I think probably the most impactful investment vehicle in the world in the last 10 years. It's an accelerator here in Silicon Valley that I've been through. Max just went through as a nonprofit. They just started to allow nonprofits in the last few years, encouraging nonprofits and encouraging more nonprofits to apply. But before we get into that, on our world and data side of things, you just talked about a few trends. So what are some of the trends that we should be aware of?
Yeah, two trends that are closely connected. Like a generation ago in 1990, only 3/4 of the world had access to electricity. And not having access to electricity, I mean, you've just said that you lived in South Africa for some time. You know what it means. Like the sun goes down and that's it for the day, right? Like there's no more homework you can do. You can't sit down with your children and learn. They can't study. It's really difficult if you imagine what a world looks like without electricity. It also means that people have to find other sources of energy. For example, in poor countries, a lot of households rely on solid fuels, wood, dung as a source of energy for cooking. And that means that they die of the indoor air pollution, a massive problem that kills millions of mostly women and children because they are often in the households every year.
So it's not just inconvenience; actually, can be fatal.
Yes, yeah. It's a big cause of death. Then the positive thing there is that more and more people get access to electricity. And if you take these long-run trends and actually break them down to a day-by-day change, the numbers are impressive. Since over this generation, every day, 295,000 people got electricity for the first time. Every single day.
What?
Yeah. Like
295,000 people every day.
Yes.
Just in the next 24 hours, boom, another 300,000 people have electricity.
Right. On average, right?
Yeah. Wow.
So the world is changing fast. It's also that the population is growing, of course, but to actually imagine what has to happen in infrastructure that is being built, and how the households are changing, it's a massive change in a really fast.
So 25% in 1990 didn't have electricity, and what is the
now? It's at 85%.
Okay, so it's 75% had it. Now 85%.
Exactly. So it's a 10% increase, and it still also shows you how far we are from where we want to be. Right. So 15% of the world population lack access to something as basic for all the other 85% as electricity. Right. Like all of those people don't even think much about what it means to be able to switch on the lights when they come home, right?
Right. But you have to be encouraged by the trend line. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a very negative trend, I think, that is very closely connected is where this electricity comes from. And if you group together the fossil fuels on one side and the low carbon emission fuels on the other side, which are nuclear and the renewable energy sources, then in 1990, 36% of all electricity was produced by low carbon sources, and we're now down to 33%. We're really far from decarbonizing even something as straightforward, really, to decarbonize, or as maybe not straightforward, but like there are harder things to decarbonize if you think about airplane travel or so. But even for electricity production, we actually didn't see any progress over the last 25 years. And I think that's something that not enough people are aware of. Renewables are a thing, but we're really far from making them produce a significant increasing share of total energy production.
Right.
Much of it is still fossil fuels, coal.
What were some of the first studies that you put out with Our World in Data that put you guys on the map? Do you remember, were there moments where just kind of blew up in front of you, like, whoa, okay, that resonates, maybe even on a small scale, where you started to see something that, relatively now with 1 million unique visitors a month, it's not as big, but early on we're like, okay, people are digging this.
I think it was much more gradual. Like, there wasn't any moment where I thought, wow, now it really changed, or now I can really see that people are interested in it. It was really gradual. Also, if you look at the growth of users, because it's so broad, it's different things that different people rely on. Mm-hmm. I think what I was really happy to see at one point is how it was picked up in teaching. To see that, like, to get feedback from a university professor or so in some cool university, was like, hey, I've just used your stuff in class. Here's my set of slides. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Like, that was, because that's so hidden, right? Like, I see it when people are sharing it on social media, but to actually see that it's useful in places where it's not visible to me, that's often cool. Or like a recent, like, we got this now, a couple of emails from psychologists and psychiatrists who use our work in helping people with anxiety. That's something I would have never imagined.
How so?
Right? They say that some people really struggle with the news very much focusing on only negative events, like the terrorist attacks in the last days, and all of the things that go wrong and that get people's attention because they're negative events. And a lot of the things that we discussed also before, that you see when you zoom out, is that sometimes things go right, and they go right in a big way, and it's really important for people to know. And apparently these psychologists that use our work think that actually helps people that have a hard time dealing with only seeing the negative news in the television and in the media. And that's something I would have never imagined. Like,
that's so cool. But it makes total sense when you think about it. I was explaining to a younger friend who was about 4 when September 11th happened, so doesn't really remember it. And I was 15, and when it happened, I had to kind of think why it was so scary for months and months and months afterwards. Now, and in one way that's obvious, it was scary for months and months and months afterwards. But in many ways, 6 months after, you could look back now and say, like, what, it was one terrorist attack. It's been 17 years. It is anomalous and a tragedy, but luckily, it's not something that has occurred ever again. But in the time right after, if you're consuming this news, that is basically saying, in the last 24 hours, we've gone from 0 terrorist deaths to 3,000. That trend line and that timeline that we were just talking about, that's like, okay, tomorrow it's going to go to 10,000. Right. Like, and it took me a little bit of time to get back into why we were so scared as Americans, but that's in the way that we consumed information back then. It was on TV all day, every day, for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And even if you zoom that out for a day to a month, okay, last month was 0 to 3,000. This month is going to be 3,000 to 15,000. I mean, there were so many rumors that now I think are laughable, but it was totally believable, of like, they've infiltrated Coca-Cola. Right. They've infiltrated our water systems. Right. They're going to go after high schools next. Like, it was so believable because of that news, the way we were consuming information. That trend line was pretty believable. And
that's true for the coverage of your own country, but it's even more true for the coverage of other countries, right? There are exceptions, of course, but often Africa is discussed when things go wrong, when there is like a terrorist attack there, an airplane crash as last week, when there is a civil war breaking out. So foreign places look really scary to news consumers because only the really scary stuff makes the news.
Right. That is, again, this all feeds into why, and it really is available to anyone. Can spend 10 minutes on Our World in Data and be blown away by how well you present, how accessible you present the research and the data that would have either gone lost or just would have been so hard to understand. Okay, so tell me a little bit. It's, as a nonprofit, you're kind of like a bootstrap startup, where you can't just ask for $5 million for the resources. What has it been like the last several years of building out Our World in Data? How have the challenges been in getting the resources? Have they come to you because people are like, this is such a valuable public good, I'm a developer and I want to help? Or that sounds almost too good to be true. Has it been pretty challenging?
It's been a bit of both, obviously, right? It's been some great feedback. I think that the best is really the people that joined me over the last years and who work with me as a team. Like, that's been the very best thing that ever happened to this project in the last years. People who really understand the mission, who are idealistic and want to make this work, who stuck around when it was really tough. That was the best thing. And now we have a team of 4 researchers, great people who come with a ton of knowledge and understanding of the research field that they're from. Hannah Ritchie is a natural scientist, has a great understanding of the energy sector, of humanity's impact on the environment, agriculture, food. Esteban is a graduate with a DPhil from Oxford, like a PhD from Oxford, an economist who understands the public sector, who understands the education.
How'd you get in touch with these people?
It's a mix. Like, Esteban and I were friends for a long time. Like, we're still good friends. And he, at some point, had the idea that he wants to have a change and was thinking, like, maybe we could work together for a month or two. And I was like, all right, let's try this out. We were a bit skeptical, like, to have like a friendship turned into a work relationship is never an easy thing. And then it worked out really nicely.
How long ago was that?
3 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And now we're working together every day. We were here at YC together as co-founders in YC, and it's great. Like,
how do you think that's, as you know, the adage goes, friends don't mix friends in business. How has it worked well for you all? What have y'all done to help make it work well?
It's like, I think with Esteban, it's this very unique thing that we are thinking along very similar lines but then have very different strengths. So we are often aligned in what we think is the way forward, but then it's very clear where his strengths lie and what bit of the problem that he's tackling, and where my strengths are and what bit of the problem I am tackling. So I think that was just a really lucky combination of interests and skills.
For people listening, what are some of the strengths that you've realized over the years? Okay, these are my strengths. These are my weaknesses.
I think...
And Esteban's is the strengths that he brings to complement that.
Right. I think where he is really exceptionally good is really building, like, organizing a strong team, organizing when do we have to do what to actually get to the next level, prepare now so that we're in the right position to actually do the next step in a month from now. Like, a very concrete one is when we got into YC, we got in as a nonprofit, but we actually weren't a nonprofit at the time. We were a research program at the University of Oxford, so we actually had to build a nonprofit. And
how did you know to even apply to Y Combinator as a nonprofit?
I think it was a combination of a couple of things. I was always in touch with Paul Graham because I loved his writings, like the founder of Y Combinator. I got into his writing as a philosopher, like, back in the day. Right.
Talk about great information. Right. Like, you can read his essays that are 10 years old. They're timeless.
Yes.
It's seriously one of the best writers I've ever come across.
Right.
I think it's paulgraham.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you came across this.
I loved his writing always. And through his, like, I was reading, for example, like a one that I recommend often, maybe if someone hasn't read an essay by Paul, is The Age of the Essay. Actually, an essay about essays. I think it's a really great text. So I got into reading Paul Graham's work and reading about startups through that philosophy angle more. And then he got interested in the kind of work that I was doing 4 or 5 years ago. So we were always in touch. When he had a question about some data, he would send me an email, much more casual. But of course, then I learned much more about what YC is actually doing. Then a second big impact was all of the work that the effective altruist community in Oxford is doing. Will McAskill, the founder and co-founder of 80,000 Hours and the Center for Effective Altruism, went to Y Combinator, and he told me great things about how helpful it is as a non-profit to go to YC.
What are some of those? Do you mind walking me through some of those things? One is just a founder especially a founder from outside the U.S. coming to Y Combinator, and for those that don't know, it's harder to get into than any Ivy League school. It's really hard to get in, and really helpful when you are in. But what was it like as a founder coming over, and then what was it like as a nonprofit founder?
Right. It was tough. Like, there's no kidding there. Like, they're serious. They say it's tough, and it's actually tough. And I think it's a bit hard to describe why it is actually tough. I think it's because they ask you questions that are hard. So you have the one-to-one interaction that is necessary with YC isn't all that much. Like, you have these bi-weekly meetings, and they ask you questions that you, for example, like, who's your audience? Was one question that we started off this discussion with them 10 weeks ago, and they make you really commit to a particular answer. Right.
What did you think that was a tough question 10 weeks ago, or was it when you gave your first try at an answer that you realized, okay, this is a lot tougher than I thought?
Exactly. Like, the questions sometimes they don't sound like the hardest questions in the world, but they make you think really hard. Where your core interests lie and what your core mission is. And it starts off with these questions, and it turns into a lot of work the following day, right?
So what? Yeah, how did you answer when? And who was asking you this question of who's your audience? Do you remember the partner?
Sure. Like, it was Michael, the now the CEO of Y Combinator, and the way that it's organized is that you have group partners, 3 YC partners, people that are really knowledgeable, really that have a lot of industry experience around Silicon Valley, who are like, the impressive thing with those guys is that the companies that go through YC are extremely diverse. Like, we are these weird academics on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum, they're like food products. There is lots of AI augmented businesses. There is there was a company that builds electric planes in our batch. There was a company that builds cargo ships that should travel the ocean 6 times faster than cargo ships currently, because they travel on hydrofoils in the way that these really fast sailing boats are traveling. So an insane spectrum of different ideas and projects. And those guys hear you for a minute and wrap their head around the particular problem in this incredibly fast speed, and ask you the questions that are relevant for you. And like, I was very impressed by the partners.
And what was your initial answer to who's your audience? Which can sound like an easy question, but threw you for a loop.
Yeah, exactly. I think it gets back to this question of the audience that we started the discussion with, where a lot of research isn't read by many people, and us now having 1 million readers every month, our answer was like, our audience is really a large audience. And we went down that route with the help of YC. But we realized that really large audience is far away from the 1 million where we currently are. And it would mean 200 million, 500 million. And the way that we do our work and the way that readers are getting informed about the world doesn't quite get together with such a large audience. So that wasn't really the route that we wanted to take, but it was really important for us to realize that, right? Like it's a straightforward thing to realize once you're through it, but it's actually really helpful and really valuable to know which route you do not take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that it's, there's two sets of problems startups run into. One is they don't have an audience or product market fit, and they're just trying to find that, and that can be really beneficial because they're building the muscles to find that and grow that an audience. Or the other side of the spectrum, where you land on something and might start as a project that people just responded to so well, and it doesn't build the muscles for. And you guys are kind of in that latter bucket where you might not have needed to think about growth,
right,
or marketing, or who is this for? Because people were just pulling it from you. And it is so great to be in that latter bucket, but it comes with its own downsides of, okay, the market's been pulling us to this point, but now when we outline our next ambitious goal, we actually don't have the muscles built or the muscle memory to get there.
Yeah.
And then it's a whole, that does throw you for a loop. Then it's like, okay, now we basically need to do something that we have not been doing for the last 5 years.
Right. You explained that way better than I did. Like, that's exactly.
No, but I know
how it was
exactly.
helpful, yeah.
I know that feeling. Before this, you were telling me as you're coming into the house that the last 3 weeks it started to crystallize for you, or at least the last 3 weeks were different than the first 7. How so? Tell me about.
Right. Like it's hard for me to actually convey that well. Maybe if someone listens.
I know
like,
it's happening real time
exactly,
for people
right?
listening. Yeah, this is literally in the last few weeks, if not last few days.
Right. And probably I don't have the distance yet to really make sense of it all. But my feeling for the longest time was like, we don't have answers to these questions. We're really struggling to make sense of it all. I felt really like beaten up and like it was tough. Like
was there a moment during YC where you're like, I don't know if we belong here?
No, because everyone is struggling.
Okay.
I think that's the nice thing about it.
Right.
Like it's not easy for anyone. Like you are a big batch of really cool people. The group dynamic is great. Like everyone is really trying to help each other out. YC sets you up in this nice way where they make clear that you're succeeding together or you're going down together, and the culture in YC is great. So it wasn't that we felt out of place. It was just hard to give the answers and hard to do the work, and it ends up being a lot of time that you actually sit down and work, and it's intense being together with your team 24/7 at the other end of the planet. So all of that is I think tough for everyone, and it was tough for us. And then in the last weeks, a lot of things fell into place in a way that we are now understanding just what you described before, like why it worked out in the first place, like why people are interested in this work in the first place, and why they come to us, and why we can be helpful to our readers. And I think then it will take us maybe a month or two to actually understand how that all changed over the last 10 weeks. But like giving the final pitch at Demo Day, the big event where everyone presents what their company or nonprofit has done, felt good. Like it felt that things fell in place for us. And then it's also, of course, a very different last day, the demo day, where the nonprofits differ from the startups, where the startups are raising money from the venture capital firms for the ideas that they are working on, and for the nonprofits, it's basically asking for donations to make this work. So it differs in that last day, but all the way through, it was super helpful, especially for us as a nonprofit, because you wouldn't find that kind of help really anywhere else.
Yeah, are there any other organizations like, and for those listening to that, in the last day, you make a 2-minute presentation, and so you have to distill everything you've been pouring years and years of your life into a 2-minute presentation, which is simplifying and terrifying at the same time.
You wouldn't think it's possible, like, going in. Right? Like, everyone has this idea, like, I need to tell everyone about all of these ins and outs of my technology or whatever, and no one thinks it's possible. And then now we just went through demo day, and like, you look at it for 2 minutes and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I get what these guys are doing and why it could possibly work out.
Would you be open with ending this on just some of the bullets from your 2-minute pitch? And how many times did you rehearse it and spend working on it?
Right. Sure. Like I think I'm
totally putting it on the spot, but yeah, just it's. I think now you have this 2-minute pitch that you can leverage all over the world.
I could give you the whole 2-minute pitch, but I think what is maybe more helpful there is lots of it is on what we discussed before. But what is really helpful maybe for some listeners who come from a similar angle as we do is to understand that this kind of environment is helpful for a nonprofit. And I think there the key learning for us is that for a for-profit company, you get a lot of feedback through the market, right? Like, whether your product works or not, whether your service is helpful for people or not, you will find out by either finding customers or not. Mm-hmm. And you will know when you fail, and when you will know what you'll have to do to find the customers. Mm-hmm. And for a nonprofit, that kind of feedback mechanism isn't really there. It's much harder to get really good feedback on the nonprofit work that you're doing.
Right, because if you're asking someone to pay $10 for something, they're going to tell you why it's great or why they're not going to pay you $10. But if you're giving something like your information away for Our World in Data, or if you're asking someone to donate to Our World in Data, it's hard to get. They might give emotionally, but then not give you the feedback on what could be better, or not know.
Like, people pay you when you actually have an impact on their life that is somehow positive. Mm-hmm. But the impact that you do as a nonprofit, it's really hard to measure, and it's not necessarily also on the people that pay for it. Mm-hmm. So there's a much bigger disconnect, and the things that have to be done as a nonprofit, like building a public good in our case, it's hard to know whether you are on track or off track. And so, especially for those people that come from a nonprofit angle, Y Combinator is great because they give you really clear feedback, and they're really honest about it, and they don't hold back with telling you exactly what they think. And it's tough, but it's always constructive. So yeah, I'm really happy that we went through the last 10 weeks.
I never thought about that from the nonprofit side of things. Of like, I knew it would be valuable to get those insights, but even more so because it's so rare to get them anywhere else.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. There's basically no other place. Investors are doing that for the startups
all day, every day
long, right? Like, they want to make sure that they are on track to deliver value for the customers. Right. But for the nonprofit world, that just doesn't exist. And YC is one of the few places that does it. And I think they've accepted now 25 nonprofits over the last years. Mm-hmm. And the feedback, it's not just us that think it's valuable, it's also the feedback that I heard from others. And it was a big motivation for us to go through it all. And well, now I can say it was worth it.
Well, and I know that they want more of them.
Yeah.
It's working. They are loving that
Yes.
The experiment so much. They want more of it.
Yes, they're very encouraging for nonprofits to apply.
Well, Max, because of time, I know you've got a full day ahead of you. I really appreciate the time that you've shared with us today, and it is I hope to have you back on, because there's so much that we didn't get into within Our World in Data. For those that have never been there, you can go to ourworldindata.org.
Yes.
Don't go to .com. That'll take you to a capitalistic fake news. No, go to ourworldindata.org, and then they can find you on Twitter, Max C. Roser.
Yes, that's the handle.
All right, at Max C. Roser is I follow like 15 people on Twitter, and you're one of them, and it is one of my favorite places to get information each day, because I know that it has a lot of research backing everything that you all publish, and it's a public good that I'm really glad exists. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation, James. And
all right.
All the best for the podcast as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Chat with you soon. Friends and listeners, thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, or you enjoy Below the Line in general, go ahead and subscribe on the iTunes podcast app, or leave a quick review. We love those, basically because we love hearing from people that find value from these kinds of conversations. And leaving a review, good or bad, is a great way to encourage more of this dialogue, and lets us know that people are enjoying it. So we appreciate those. You can also follow us on Twitter at Below the Line Podcast, and tweet us questions anytime. Or you can email us at askbelowtheline@gmail.com. That's Below the Line Podcast on Twitter, and askbelowtheline@gmail. I have no idea why those are different, but anyhow, I'm your host, James Beshara, and this has been another episode of Below the Line. Until next time.
Below the Line with James Beshara is brought to you by Straight Up Podcasts.